Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a successful real estate agent, and I've always been good at seeing value, not just in houses, but in relationships too. My husband, Tom, and I were lucky to inherit a beautiful vacation home by the lake. It was quiet, peaceful, and the perfect escape from busy city life and, to be honest, from my in-laws. Tom's parents never really warmed up to me. They came from a more traditional background and often made small, passive-aggressive comments about my career and my modest upbringing. A real estate agent, always trying to sell something. They'd joke, but I knew there was more to their words. This house wasn't just a building for us, it was our haven, where we shared laughter during family get-togethers and found peace on our own. But as Tom's parents got older, they started asking us to sign the house over to them. We need to make sure it stays in the family for future generations, they said one night at dinner. The room felt tense, and I could sense the pressure in the air. But it is staying in the family. Tom and I are your family, aren't we? I asked, trying to stay calm even though I was getting frustrated. Yes, Maria, but you know what we mean. It's about securing the family legacy, Tom's father replied, his tone leaving no room for debate. The tension was almost too much to bear. Tom, bless him, was torn. He wanted to make his parents happy, but he hated how it was affecting our marriage. We spent many nights talking about what to do. Stress etched on both our faces. Why do they have to make everything about business? I asked him during one of those late-night talks. Tom sighed deeply, a sound that said more than words ever could. It's how they've always been, Maria. It's not just about the house, it's about control, he finally said, sadness in his eyes that matched my own. It wasn't just what they said, it was how they acted. Every time they visited the house, it felt like a game. They would drop hints about the future of the property. During one particularly blunt conversation, Tom's mom said, "You two don't need such a big place. Think about the family. Think about your brothers." Her words hurt. It wasn't just that she implied we didn't deserve the house. It was that she seemed to be saying we weren't enough of a family ourselves to keep it. That's not fair, I found myself saying. We love this home just as much as you do. Why isn't that enough? It was clear now that this wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, boundaries, and where family loyalty ends and personal independence begins. Look at this, David, I said, showing him emails between Tom and his parents. They've been planning this for months, trying to pressure me into signing over the deed. You're kidding me, David replied, shocked. That's low, even for them. So, what's your plan? I don't know yet. I'm so angry, I can't even think straight, I admitted. Okay, let's not rush. There are ways to handle this. Maria, ways to make sure you stay in control. Have you thought about selling the house? Just end it all and sell it to someone else. Can I do that without Tom agreeing? I asked. If both your names are on the deed, you'd both need to sign off on a sale. But maybe it's time Tom realizes what his parents' manipulations are costing him. You think he'd go for it? It might be the wake-up call he needs. Otherwise, you'll keep being painted as the villain in their story. That evening, back at home, I couldn't shake the cold feeling of betrayal. It felt like it was seeping into our home, our supposed safe place. When Tom came home, I confronted him. You and your parents have been planning behind my back. How could you, Tom? It's not like that, Maria, he replied. They're just worried about the future, about stability. Stability or control? This is our home, Tom, our future. Why am I only hearing about this now? I was going to talk to you, I swear. They just have a way of pushing until I give in. And what if I don't give in, Tom? What then? Your parents gave me an ultimatum today. Sign over the house by the end of the month or face the consequences. What consequences? Tom asked, startled. I don't know, they didn't say, I replied. They didn't what, Tom? Are they threatening to cut us off? To come between us? I don't know, Maria, I just know they're serious. The next day, I met with David again, feeling the weight of the ultimatum pressing on me. Your in-laws are playing dirty, that's obvious. If you sell, you can avoid their threats altogether. Let's weigh the pros and cons. This is about more than just a property, this is about your independence. You're right, I sighed, but I hate that it's come to this. It feels like I'm being pushed out of my own life. That's why you need to take control again, David said. Maybe it's time to show Tom and his parents that you won't be bulldozed. That evening, Tom tried to patch things up, but the gap between us had grown, strained by the secrets and scheming. Maria, please, he said, let's just talk. We can find a way to make everyone happy. Can we? Tom, because it seems like your parents' happiness comes at the cost of mine. It's not like that, he insisted. They just want what's best for all of us. And what about what I want? Doesn't that matter? I asked. You know it does, he said, frustrated, but they're my parents. We can't work something out like this, Tom. This is our life, not a business negotiation. I need to think about what's best for me too. Maybe David is right. Maybe selling the house is the only way to take back control. Sell? Maria, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious, Tom. I won't be backed into a corner, not by your parents, not by anyone. Maria, please. No, Tom, it's time I made a decision that's right for me, I said, my voice steady. I'm going to think about all my options and do what's best for me. I hope you can understand that. As Tom stood there, stunned, I felt a mix of fear and determination brewing inside me. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. At the dining table, the air was thick with tension. We all knew why we were here. We all know the reason for this meeting. I began, looking around at everyone. The table had seen happier days, but today felt different. Tom looked anxious, his parents expectant. Before I could continue, Tom's father spoke up. Before we proceed, we want to make sure this transition goes smoothly for everyone. I nodded, placing the stack of papers in front of me. I've thought about this long and hard. This isn't just a transaction, this house is part of who we are. Exactly, Maria, his mother chimed in, a thin smile on her face. It's for the family, for the future of our grandchildren. I glanced at Tom, who was staring at the table. Tom, do you have anything you want to say before we continue? He shifted uncomfortably. I just want what's best for us, for our family. And what is best, Tom? I asked softly. He hesitated. I think keeping the house and the family is the right thing to do. It's what my parents want. Taking a deep breath, I leaned forward. Well, there's been a change of plans. Tom's father frowned. What are you talking about, Maria? The house, I said, my voice calm but firm. It's already been sold. The room fell into stunned silence. Tom's eyes snapped up to meet mine. Sold? His mother gasped. To whom? When? To a charitable organization. They plan to turn it into a retreat for underprivileged families, I said, sliding the proof of sale across the table. Tom's father's voice rose. How could you do this without telling us? I had my reasons, I replied firmly. This house was as much mine as it was Tom's. I couldn't let it be used as a tool for manipulation any longer. We never, his mother began, her face flushed. Please, I cut her off. I've seen the emails, the plans. I felt the pressure. This was the only way I knew to protect what was ours, what was mine. Tom looked torn, his voice pained. Maria, why didn't you talk to me about this? I wanted to, but every time we spoke, it felt like your parents' wishes came first. Just then, the doorbell rang. I stood to answer it, letting in Miss Johnson, the representative from the charity. She entered with a calm presence. Good afternoon. I'm here to discuss the future of the property, she said, extending her hand to Tom's parents. Tom murmured, still in shock. We had no idea it would come to this. Miss Johnson smiled warmly. We plan to honor the spirit of this home. Families in need will find peace here, just as you did. I hope you can see the good in that. Tom's mother looked between me and Miss Johnson, her sharp demeanor softening slightly. And our son, our family. I believe this is a new beginning for all of us, I replied, a mix of relief and defiance in my voice, one where we respect each other's decisions and boundaries. Tom stood and came to my side. I need to think about all this. Maria, can we talk? Of course, I said, hoping this crisis could finally begin to heal the rift between us. As Miss Johnson explained the charity's plans for the home, I caught Tom's eye. There was a flicker of understanding, maybe even gratitude. It felt like the first step toward healing. The meeting ended with promises to communicate better. While the reconciliation wasn't complete, the house felt lighter, its walls ready to embrace a new chapter. The echoes of that meeting stayed with me in the following weeks, a constant reminder of the seismic shift in our family dynamics. As I faced the backlash from Tom's parents and their circle, Tom became my greatest support. One evening, while we sat among boxes in the old vacation home, packing up memories, Tom broke the silence. This isn't just about the house anymore, is it? No, I replied, sealing another box with tape. It's about setting boundaries, Tom. It's about respect. Tom sighed. the weight of everything finally sinking in. You were right, Maria. My parents, they went too far. I see that now. The realization wasn't easy for Tom. His loyalty to his parents clashed with his love for me, but the support he showed by standing by my side through the storm marked the start of a new chapter for us. In the weeks that followed, Tom's parents had to face the consequences of their actions. Word of their scheming and the sale of the house became public, damaging their reputation. Humiliated by their own greed and the judgment of others, they were forced to retreat, dealing with their shame in private. As I look back on everything, the challenges we faced and the victories we achieved, I understand the importance of standing firm in one's values. Selling the vacation home, while filled with conflict, was necessary for us to reclaim our independence and redefine our lives on our own terms. Thank you for following my story. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't just about asserting your rights, but also about choosing your own path and valuing your self-worth. Here's to new beginnings and personal victories. How would you handle toxic family pressures while keeping your boundaries strong? Feel free to share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of life, struggle, and triumph.
Please, let's not cancel our wedding. I know I acted a bit immature, but when I saw his face, I felt bad. It seemed like my boyfriend's dad was judging me, and my boyfriend didn't stand up for me. I was really fed up with both of them, judging me just by what I wear or own. At our first meeting, they made me feel unwelcome, and at the second, they looked down on me for not being rich. But when they saw the brand of my coat, suddenly they treated me differently. My name's Jessica Smith, and I'm 28 years old. I work at an airport, and my folks have a fashion business back in Italy. Despite that, I live solo in New York City. That's where I met Jacob Turner, my current boyfriend, at my favorite cafe. He's a couple of years older than me and a regular at the same spot. As we started seeing more of each other, he treated me well, and I quickly fell for him. After 2 years together, he proposed we visit his folks for a marriage meeting. I was overjoyed. It felt like he was on the same page about marriage. His dad, like mine, runs a big fashion brand, and I admired how globally active he was. Jacob, just like his dad, dressed in branded clothes. When he mentioned his dad wasn't keen on folks who seemed poor, I reassured him with a smile, saying I was okay with it. I'm not saying you're lacking in money or anything, but it's more about how you present yourself, he said. I don't think he meant any harm, but his words felt like he was talking down to me. Are you implying there's something wrong with how I dress? I asked. No, I think your individual style is great, he replied. How dare you? I make sure to dress nicely to be worthy of being with Jacob. Ever since I started dating Jacob, I've been paying more attention to my fashion, even on my days off. I always wear makeup now, and I've started to take a keen interest in my outfits, from affordable brands to luxury labels. Jacob's presence always shines brightly, and I feel like I pale in comparison next to him. His best feature is undoubtedly his looks, with his model-like physique and face, and the confident aura he exudes. He could easily be in a fashion magazine. As for work, I earn a higher income and speak multiple languages. In terms of skills and abilities, I might have the upper hand. However, his facial features are so striking that I couldn't help but be drawn to him effortlessly. But his occasional condescending comments bothered me, I admitted. Well, Jessica, you're beautiful, so I think you'll be okay. But just know, my dad is strict, Jacob warned. Strict in what way? I inquired. In determining whether you fit the brand image of my dad's company and if you're suitable for the Turner family, he explained. So basically, my dad is extremely proud of his brand, and he won't forgive anyone who tarnishes it. I might not be able to support you on the day, he added with a smile, which only increased my pressure. What do you mean you won't help me? I felt like he was ready to abandon me without a second thought. As the day of the marriage meeting approached, I couldn't shake off my growing unease. Their future in-laws' house turned out to be a luxurious high-rise apartment. Which floor do they live on? I asked. The top floor, he replied casually. But to me, it was shocking enough to make me lose my balance. It wasn't surprising though. Later, I found out it was a super luxury apartment with a monthly rent of $7,000. The apartment boasted 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a well-equipped kitchen. It was conveniently located just a 2-minute walk from the station, although the rent was steep. Feeling uneasy, I couldn't help but wonder aloud, "I hope everything will be all right." To my surprise, he responded with a somewhat tense expression, "I'm not sure." It seemed like his father's approval mattered more to him than his own girlfriend's feelings. Clinging to a sense of unease, I stepped into the elevator with him. Upon arriving at his place, we were greeted by his mother. From her demeanor and the luxurious attire she wore, it was evident that the Turners were a well-to-do family. My parents also run a business, so I recognized right away that everything she was wearing was high-end. I thought to myself, despite her welcome, her tone was chilly, as if she had little interest in me. I was ushered into the living room, where his father awaited us. "Jacob, is this the woman you wish to marry?" he asked. "Yes, this is Jessica. She's 2 years younger than me and works as ground crew at the airport," Jacob replied. As he finished the introduction, I nodded politely. Just as I was about to introduce myself, his father posed a question that left me puzzled. "Jessica, how much did your entire outfit cost?" I hesitated before answering. The coat is from the Gap, and the skirt is from Zara, so altogether, it's probably around $300. Upon hearing my response, his father let out a heavy sigh and proceeded to scold Jacob. "Jacob, you've brought this poorly dressed woman here. Are you trying to bring shame to our family name?" I was taken aback. Not only had his father insulted me by calling me poorly dressed, but Jacob, instead of defending me, was apologizing profusely. That's when I knew I couldn't go through with marrying him. "That's enough. We're done here," declared his father, dismissing me completely. "I'm the CEO of a luxury brand. I can't tolerate a woman with such cheap taste." Jacob stood there, stunned into silence. Our engagement was off, and we made our way home, walking silently side by side. Jacob began to complain. "Didn't I tell you not to dress how you like? Because of you, I was humiliated in front of my parents." "What? Why can't I choose my own clothes? Are you going to force me to wear only your dad's brand after we're married?" I snapped back, angered by his lack of support and his father's attitude. Jacob's emotions started to bubble up too. "Yes, exactly. If you wear his clothes, you'll impress everyone. Please, just listen to me for once. Your behavior is putting our marriage at risk," he pleaded. "Then let's call off the wedding," I retorted sharply. Jacob stopped in his tracks, shocked by my firmness. With a tense expression, he stuttered, "You're kidding, right?" I responded firmly, "I'm serious." Suddenly, all of his confidence vanished, and he began apologizing repeatedly, begging, please, anything but calling off the wedding. Seeing him plead like that made me wonder if I had been too harsh. So, for now, I decided to wait and watch. We agreed to revisit the marriage meeting in a week, but his father threatened to call off the engagement if things didn't go well. I found myself thinking along the same lines as Jacob. "Hey, what about wearing this outfit for the meeting with my parents?" I suggested, noticing how affected Jacob was after the first meeting. His biggest worry seemed to be not upsetting his father. It was clear that his father's approval meant more to him than our upcoming marriage. That's why he confidently proposed wearing the same brand of clothing as his father. "I'll decide what to wear. If you're going to interfere, let's end things right here," I told him firmly, feeling my desire to marry him slowly fading. As a last resort, I decided to reach out to my dad. I spilled everything that had happened to him. Fast forward to the day of the second meeting. Jacob seemed anxious from the morning, while I remained calm. However, there was one noticeable difference. My outfit. All the clothes I wore were from Italy, something I had requested from my dad. He oversees a brand overseas, which is also sold in the US. Sensing the tension, my dad arranged for clothes to be delivered from his American branch. Since Jacob was at work when they arrived, he was unaware of the switch. When he noticed my new coat, he looked puzzled but didn't comment due to our tight schedule before the meeting. On the way to his parents' house, he pleaded with me, Let's just make this meeting a success, okay? You do want to marry me, right? His expression suggested that I should feel privileged to marry him, but deep down, I wasn't as excited about getting married anymore. The growing distrust between us weighed heavily on my mind as we arrived at his parents' house. Despite my inner turmoil, I plastered on a fake smile and assured him I'll do my best. This time, it was his father who greeted us, with my mother-in-law nowhere in sight. Without wasting any time, my father-in-law launched into criticism. "Jacob, what's the meaning of this? Didn't you promise to dress her in our brand?" His pride in the family brand surpassed my expectations. He once mentioned that even a pair of socks from their brand cost over $200. "I'm sorry, Dad." Jessica insisted on choosing her own outfit. Jacob apologized. My father-in-law let out a sigh and turned his attention to me. "Jessica, could you please refrain from tarnishing our family's brand image?" "That coat looks rather cheap," he remarked, scrutinizing my new coat closely. "It seems like a knockoff, doesn't it? It resembles Louis Vuitton at first glance, but it's not genuine." He took out his phone and began searching for something, likely checking the price. "Here it is. There's a knockoff that looks identical to your coat, and it's inexpensive. Even if you choose not to wear our brand, surely there are better options than that." My father-in-law proceeded to ruthlessly critique my appearance. His behavior was utterly unacceptable, signaling that this meeting was no longer just a formality for our impending marriage. Despite the tension, Jacob remained silent in front of his father, failing to defend me. "Well, take a seat and remove that $60 coat. You look destitute," he sneered. Unbeknownst to him, there was a coat similar to mine priced at $60, albeit missing a few zeros. At this point, I had reached my limit. "Excuse me, may I borrow a hanger?" I reached out for one nearby, but my father-in-law scoffed. "For a cheap coat like that, a hanger is too generous. There's a basket over there, use that. Jacob, fetch it for her." He commanded Jacob to hand me a laundry basket, reducing him to nothing more than a puppet under his father's control. Despite our exchanged glances, Jacob remained silent. However, his demeanor shifted when he glimpsed the label on my coat, which I reluctantly placed in the basket. "Dad, this coat is Prada," he exclaimed in disbelief. Both of them were stunned. My future father-in-law, who had previously dismissed my coat as cheap, suddenly changed his tune upon seeing the tag. "Oh, Jessica, why didn't you mention it earlier? You're wearing something truly remarkable," he remarked, attempting to force a smile. I returned his gaze with a cold stare and then addressed the matter of our marriage. "Let's call it off, please." They were taken aback. "What do you mean, Jessica? It's only fair. Even if he's your own father, if you can't defend your future wife when she's being belittled, I can't accept you as my husband." When I turned to Jacob for a response, he looked down, unable to utter a word. "Furthermore, father-in-law, this coat is from a brand owned by my father. And when I mentioned Prada, it's a collaborative piece with Prada, overseen by my father. There are only 5 of these in the world, valued at $60,000. $60,000. Father-in-law reacted as if struck by lightning. Later, I learned that the most expensive coat from his brand cost around $12,000. Although $12,000 might seem high-end to most people, it pales in comparison to mine. So it appears big brand CEOs judge people solely based on their appearance, huh? My father-in-law was speechless. Turning to both of them, I continued, "And Jacob, did you really think being the son of a CEO made you invincible? Sure, you dress well and look good, but your character doesn't measure up." "What? What are you saying?" Jacob attempted to retort, but to me, his defensiveness seemed absurd. "Can you even understand where I'm coming from? You left me to endure all the criticism alone and even pressured me to succeed the second time around. How would you feel if our positions were reversed?" "Well, I don't want to endure any more pain just to save face," I rebuked him sternly. His demeanor softened, and he simply said, "I'm sorry." Then, addressing my father-in-law, Jacob added, "Of course, I approve of the marriage. I was wrong. Please, let's calm down. Despite his attempt to regain control, I was thoroughly repulsed by his behavior, still under the mistaken belief that he held the upper hand. Letting out a deep sigh, I startled my father-in-law, who looked at me anxiously. Are you familiar with the ultra-luxury Italian brand Ruby? Ah, yes, they're a renowned global brand. I know the CEO, my father-in-law responded. Well, my coat is from Ruby. It's a collaboration with Prada. I see, but the issue isn't. Actually, I'm the CEO's daughter, I interrupted. What? You're kidding. Both of them stared at me in disbelief, their mouths opening and closing without uttering a word. It was clear they were struggling to process the revelation. I intended to formally disclose this when we announced our engagement, but given the circumstances, it didn't seem appropriate. So, it appears I've been disrespecting the daughter of a more prestigious brand all this time. So, Dad, Jacob, enough with the charade. How did you not know this sooner? Because of you, we've made fools of ourselves. My father-in-law began to blame his son, feeling cornered. While it may have appeared as though he was merely deflecting blame, it evidently struck a nerve for both of them. I had no idea, all right? All I knew was that she worked as ground staff, my boyfriend admitted, his voice trembling with fear of his father. He seemed genuinely terrified. Suddenly, my father-in-law's demeanor towards me shifted. I apologize for my son's behavior. Let me prepare some tea for you, he said, forcing a smile that I found insincere. Do you always judge people based on superficial factors and change your attitude once you learn about their status? Can't you evaluate people beyond their appearances? I confronted him, my tone firm as I had resigned myself to the fact that our marriage was no longer an option. When I informed my father about the situation, he mentioned that he's contemplating acquiring your company. What? He's planning to buy my company? Yes, he believes that someone who judges others solely by their fashion brand isn't fit to lead a major company. Fashion brands shouldn't be used to flaunt status. Therefore, the wearer, my father-in-law, began to sweat visibly, starting to grasp the seriousness of the situation. While he may flaunt his status as the president of a major brand now, being acquired would be a different story. Dad, if we're acquired now, we're in trouble, right? We don't have the resources to resist, do we? Jacob asked his father, his disappointment evident in his voice. It seemed he had some understanding of the company's financial situation. I later discovered that my father-in-law's company was barely scraping by, always teetering on the brink of financial ruin. Any significant setback could easily push them into the red, and it seemed that setback had arrived in the form of a potential acquisition. My father always follows through on his promises, and he raised me to do the same. So, as I mentioned before, there will be no wedding. Jessica, I'm so sorry, Jacob said, tears welling up in his eyes. I barely spared him a glance. It was hard to reconcile the once cool image of him with the pathetic sight before me. And then there was my father-in-law. Jessica, I beg you, please reconsider the acquisition, he pleaded. While I didn't hold the final decision, it was surreal to see my father-in-law groveling to me, the same person he had looked down on just moments earlier. His misplaced pride disgusted me, and I simply replied, "That's for my father to decide." With all hope seemingly lost, my father-in-law paled and sank to his knees. Ignoring the two despairing men, I left my father-in-law's house. Following that day, I lost touch with Jacob. When I briefed my father, he disclosed that the acquisition process was already in motion. My father, typically gentle and fair-minded, underwent a transformation upon learning of my distress. He had long eyed the opportunity to acquire my ex-father-in-law's company, buying his time for the right moment. However, upon discovering that the same man who had belittled me for my background was the CEO of the target company, my father's resolve solidified. All uncertainty evaporated. He remarked, "In this acquisition, my priority is to safeguard the well-being of all employees except the CEO." This meant that my ex-father-in-law's fate rested entirely in my father's hands. As for the subsequent fates of those two individuals, I remained uninformed. However, a sense of relief washed over me when I stumbled upon breaking news on TV. The report announced the acquisition of a prominent fashion brand by Ruby Corp, a major American entity. The footage featured my ex-father-in-law during the acquisition. Looking utterly defeated, the fire extinguished from his eyes. My ex-father-in-law and ex-boyfriend, who both prioritized social status in marriage, appeared incapable of recognizing the intrinsic worth of individuals. I firmly believe that CEOs should emulate my father, who assesses individuals based on their character rather than superficial traits. This experience imparted a profound lesson, applicable not only to branded items but to all facets of life.
Will you be my girlfriend with the intention of marrying me? That's what everyone I met through a friend wanted to know. One guy, who was 3 years younger than me, said he fell for me right away. I thought about my age and wanting to settle down, so I said yes. A year later, we tied the knot. I'm Michelle, 34 years old, working for a big company. Living overseas has always been my dream. My husband, Paul, is younger than me, but he's a natural leader and takes charge in our relationship. He's the one who leads our household, and I'm okay with that. I've been used to living alone for a while, so I don't mind doing the chores and cooking. Paul doesn't pitch in much, but I don't find it bothersome. When we're out together, Paul always takes the lead, which lets me relax and have fun without any worries. It feels like a nice balance between us. However, everything changed when my mother passed away while I was working. I got a call from my dad, telling me that my mom's illness had gotten worse and she collapsed. I rushed to the hospital, about 2 hours away, to say my final goodbye. I stayed with my dad to help arrange the funeral. When I called Paul, he said he couldn't leave work on short notice. He didn't come to the wake, and although he made it to the funeral, he wasn't dressed appropriately. I had to quickly arrange a suit for him to rent. He complained a lot, saying I should have sorted everything out beforehand. With all the grief and business, I couldn't deal with Paul's complaints, so I brushed them off. But he didn't seem to appreciate that, and he was in a bad mood the whole time. Since then, it seems like our arguments as a couple have been on the rise. It's normal to have some disagreements after being married for 3 years, but lately, Paul's been picking fights more aggressively. His controlling behavior has been overwhelming, often telling me what to do and taking charge. I grew tired of it and tried standing up to him a few times, but since he didn't know how things were managed around the house, even simple tasks like preparing for his business trips became lengthy affairs. Plus, he'd complain while trying to help, only making more of a mess. Eventually, I realized it was easier if I just handled things myself. It wasn't about blindly obeying him. I took charge of certain tasks to save myself the hassle. I'm going to start preparing for us to join the gathering for my mom's first death anniversary next week, I informed Paul. He responded grumpily, "Okay, but I have an important meeting that day. What should I do?" I've mentioned this gathering well in advance. I was taken aback by his sudden remark. "What? You're not going?" Paul sighed heavily. "It's not that, but it'll be tough to delegate everything to my juniors, you know." He seemed pleased with his recent promotion and often talked about his junior team members. I felt like sighing in return. "Please plan for it, okay?" I emphasized. The day before the gathering, when I got home from work, Paul was sulking and drinking beer in the living room. "I'm sorry I'm late." I had to work overtime. I apologized. I could tell he was upset because I was late and dinner was delayed. "I've been waiting here for an hour just as I thought," he grumbled. "But it's just 1 hour, isn't it?" I reasoned. If he couldn't prepare dinner, he could have gone out to buy something. I had informed him of my late arrival time. He could have taken some initiative and handled things on his own. Suppressing the urge to speak my mind, I handed him a takeout box. I thought it'd take too long if I cooked, so I picked this up on my way home instead, I explained. In response, Paul slammed a glass of beer onto the table. "Takeout again? Aren't you slacking off a bit too much lately?" The last time I brought home takeout was about 2 weeks ago. True, I've been busy lately and maybe I haven't been cooking elaborate meals every day. But I always make sure we have a balanced diet and rarely rely on prepackaged items. Still, I didn't think I deserved that kind of criticism. As I debated whether to respond, Paul, misunderstanding something, decided to add insult to injury. Can't say anything because it's true, huh? Do your chores properly. You've been coming home late lately, claiming you're working overtime. You're probably just out having an affair, Paul shouted. His words ignited a wave of anger that had been simmering inside me. Enough was enough. If you know I'm working late, the least you can do is prepare dinner for us. It's okay if you can't cook. Getting takeout isn't too difficult, is it? I always let you know when I'll be late. And despite being busy, I handle all our household chores. There's no need for that kind of attitude, I asserted. Paul shot me a glare. You know what? You're 3 years older than me. I could have married someone in their 20s, but I chose you, an older woman. Show some appreciation and do as I say. No one else would want you, so you'd be in trouble if I left, wouldn't you? Did he really just say that? I was furious and couldn't hold back any longer. Then maybe you should have married a younger woman when we started dating before we got married. I asked if you were okay with me being older, and you said yes. That's why we got married. Even without you, I could manage my life. I retorted. Paul scoffed at my words. Whatever, let's get a divorce. With that, he grabbed his beer and the takeout box and stormed off to his room. We had arguments before, but this was a first. I was done with him. I decided to eat my takeout dinner to calm my nerves, assuming Paul was probably just irritated because he was hungry. But even as I filled my stomach, I couldn't shake off the disbelief that this was all happening the day before my mother's first death anniversary. After a while, I called out to Paul from outside his room, "We need to leave by 8 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 7. There was no response, but I sensed he was awake. With those words said, I went to bed, feeling unsettled. The next morning, when I woke up early, Paul was already gone. The bags I had packed were still in the room, indicating he hadn't left for the gathering without me. Where had he disappeared to? I called his cell, but got no answer. My texts went unanswered too. Left with no other option, I left a voicemail and began getting ready to head out alone. I managed to reach Paul while waiting at the train station. I have to go to my meeting. I can't leave it to my juniors, after all, was all he said before the call abruptly ended. Overwhelmed by a mix of anger and resignation, I found myself in a state of stunned confusion. Before I could process it further, the train arrived, carrying luggage for 2, but I boarded alone. When I arrived at my father's house, he anxiously inquired, "Where's Paul?" Seeing my father's sadness since my mother's passing, I didn't want to add to his worries. Taking a deep breath, I forced a smile and replied, "Sorry, he got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come here, but he recently got a promotion, and it sounded urgent, so I suggested he prioritize that." My father nodded understandingly. "I see. He's working hard. It's a shame I couldn't see him, but your mother would understand. Let him know he's always welcome to visit." Though his words stung a bit, I kept up the smile throughout the day. With no word from Paul, the night passed without any contact from either of us. Planning to stay overnight and return home the next day as originally intended, I felt a bit childish for not reaching out to him. Maybe I'd cook his favorite dish, hamburgers, tomorrow to make amends. With that thought, I went to bed. The next day, after leaving my father's house and arriving home around noon, I decided to drop off my bags before heading to the grocery store. As expected, dirty laundry was strewn around the living room, a sign that Paul still hadn't grasped how to use the washing machine. Sighing, I gathered the laundry and tossed it into the washer along with my own. Taking a break and returning to the living room, something on the table caught my eye. As I got closer, disbelief washed over me. There, sitting on the table, were divorce papers, already signed by Paul. Why? I stared at the papers, bewildered. Was this his way of asking for a divorce? Pulling out my cell phone from my bag, I realized it should be Paul's lunch break. I wasn't sure if Paul would answer, but to my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. "Paul, what's the deal with these divorce papers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. On the other end, Paul laughed. What do you mean? It's pretty straightforward. I don't want an older wife who won't do her share of household chores. That's why I've decided on a divorce. If we split, I can find someone younger and more appealing. After all, a wife is like a status symbol, isn't she? It's hard to boast about you being older when my colleagues ask. Dodging the topic isn't exactly simple. I was speechless, utterly lost for words. If you don't want a divorce, then start pulling your weight around the house. I'll be home as usual today, so make sure to grab some beer, all right? But if you're set on this, take the divorce papers to the family court. The ball's in your court, he said before hanging up abruptly. The call left me stunned, unable to utter a single word. It seemed Paul believed his ultimatum would force me to comply. All this time, I'd done the chores not out of fear of him leaving, but because I disliked having to ask him. He likely assumed otherwise, presuming my compliance stemmed from a fear of abandonment, given his dominant nature. Being married to a younger man might draw envy from others, but in reality, there's nothing particularly remarkable about it. I often found myself emphasizing his age, but truth be told, he's quite average in appearance, personality, and income. Describing him as younger was simply convenient. Initially, the age gap concerned me, but now that we're both in our 30s with only a 3-year difference, it feels insignificant. Had the gap been wider, perhaps I feel differently, but constantly being labeled as the older wife when we're essentially peers feels disheartening. I grabbed my bag and made a beeline for the family court. As I handed in the divorce papers, a wave of relief washed over me. Despite thinking we were doing okay, it's clear things are over now. But I can manage without Paul. With that realization, a weight lifted off my shoulders, prompting me to reach out to my boss and request a few days of paid leave. Luckily, work had just eased up, so he granted me about a week off. Now that I'm divorced, it's time to sort out my belongings. Thankfully, I didn't have much to begin with, so tidying up was a breeze. I stashed the larger items in a storage unit, packed my essentials and clothes into the car, and on a whim, decided to head to a hot spring resort. It seemed like the off-season for hotels, so I managed to snag a cheap room on the spot. The thrill of the drive filled me with excitement. As I soaked in the hot springs and lounged in my room, my phone suddenly rang. Michelle, I asked you to pick up beer, didn't I? Where are you? I couldn't help but chuckle, recalling Paul's usual routine. I'm actually at a hot spring resort right now, I replied. What? A hot spring resort? Why? Paul's confusion was evident in his voice. Well, you did say to file the divorce papers if I disagreed with you. I reminded him, amused at the thought of his reaction. Wait, you actually filed them? Paul sounded flustered. Of course I did. Why? Is something wrong? After all, it was your suggestion. Paul finally regained his composure. Are you serious? When you say hot spring resort, do you mean some nearby spa? If that's the case, I'll grab dinner, so just come home soon. His sudden caring tone made me laugh even more. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive. They even have an outdoor natural hot spring. It's quite lovely. I wonder if it'll rain tomorrow. Since you're going out to buy your own dinner, I've already packed up my things so you won't have to worry about me coming back. Please take care of yourself, Paul pleaded desperately, hoping I would reconsider. But I had no intention of returning. You're the one who initiated the divorce papers, remember. It was clear he was using the threat of divorce to manipulate me. I've already told you I can manage without you. Now that you've divorced your older wife, you can find someone younger. Whether you succeed or not is up to you. Paul fell silent. It might not be my place, but you should consider moving out of that apartment. I continued. Finally, Paul spoke up again. Why should I? His voice was barely audible. Think about your finances. You'll end up broke if you keep living there. You can't handle chores, cooking, or laundry. You'll need to hire help and eat out, right? That's costly. It would be problematic if most of your salary went toward rent. You always thought you were the one providing for me, but my salary is nearly double yours. You've never been the provider. If anything, it's been the opposite. And that confidence you had because of that one junior. I have multiple juniors under me and even more under them. I usually keep work talk to myself because Paul gets moody, but I outrank him both in position and salary. You'd think he'd have noticed by now, living together and all, but it seems like it's news to him. Maybe Paul, being the proud, dominant man he is, kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that he can't, he must be feeling quite defeated. I've dealt a blow to this pride, payback for all these years. As for why I handled the household chores without complaint, even when you acted domineering, it was partly because you were younger and I cut you some slack, and partly because it was too much hassle to ask anything of you. I didn't need you to stay with me. I was just handling your needs alongside my own chores. So when you said, do the chores or we divorce, it was an easy choice. We're strangers now. Goodbye. I said my piece and hung up the phone. Feeling rejuvenated, I savored the hotel's cuisine. As anticipated, Paul reached out for reconciliation, but I responded with a smile. I'm older than you. I doubt you want me back. Apparently, he hadn't fared well with younger women. Eventually, Paul gave up and moved out of the apartment. Engaging a lawyer for asset division, I demanded more to compensate for the burden of household chores I had endured. Paul, being thrifty, didn't hire legal representation, giving me the upper hand. With my lawyer's assistance, we negotiated an agreement with favorable terms for me. Interestingly, it appears Paul's lone junior had been vocal about his poor leadership skills, to the extent that he couldn't even consider him a competent boss. Paul caught wind of this, and they are now embroiled in a dispute. He should have realized the importance of nurturing his own team. As for me, I had been offered a position at our overseas headquarters. Initially hesitant due to the circumstances and out of consideration for Paul, I finally decided to seize the opportunity. I'm currently gearing up for the transition. Though I've caused my father some concern, we've begun practicing video calls to stay connected when I'm abroad. I'm thrilled to pursue the career I've dreamed of since childhood. It's time to give it my all. Love each other forever. I was sure I wanted to be with this kind man. But things changed after we got married. The sweet guy I knew disappeared. Now he treats me like a maid, not his wife. He always tells me to be quiet and just listen to him. I wonder how long this will go on. Little did I know, something good was about to happen. Hi, I'm Michelle Jenkins, 28 years old. I work as a secretary at my dad's company and also manage our home. My dad took over the business from my grandpa 2 years ago. Being the boss's daughter, guys usually approach me for money. I've never really been in love before. I stopped talking about my family to avoid attracting gold diggers. That's when I met David, the man who became my husband. I asked my friend who introduced us to not mention that I'm the boss's daughter. David doesn't gamble or smoke, and he drinks moderately. He was my dream guy, always telling me he loved and adored me. I thought I could spend my life with him. But when I told my dad about marrying David, he said, Michelle, it's okay to marry him, but don't let him know you're the boss's daughter. I argued, Dad, he's a good person. He's not after money. Dad insisted, I don't want you to have problems. Let's revisit this after a year of marriage. If David stays the same, we'll talk about the company. Reluctantly, I agreed. Dad knew about my past bad experiences with guys after money. He just wanted to protect me. I decided to follow Dad's advice and keep quiet about being the boss's daughter for a year. Until then, I'd just be a regular secretary. So despite everything, David and I tied the knot. But now, a year later, I still haven't told him the truth. Why? Because he's changed. After the wedding, he became distant and cold. He'd come home from work in a bad mood, criticizing everything, even the dinners I made. Hamburgers again? We're not kids. Can't you cook something different? But David, you used to love them. I've made them lots before. Don't argue. You always make the same dishes. Besides salad and soup, you should know how to cook at least 5 other things. 5? That's too much. I have work too, you know. When I ask you to do something, you should do it. I married you, so listen to me. I'm sorry. The warmth and kindness he once had vanished, replaced by a coldness that felt as sharp as ice. At first, I thought he was just having a rough day, but things kept getting worse. After 6 months of marriage, David turned into a full-blown tyrant. He'd nitpick about everything, from how I did the laundry to how I cleaned the house. If I dared to speak up, he'd yell at me with a terrifying look. Enduring his yelling was one thing, but sometimes he'd even throw away the meals I cooked. A year into our marriage, his tyrannical behavior hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Just the other day, I got home late from work, and he immediately started shouting, "You're late. Do you even know what time it is?" I'm sorry. Work got busy. I'll start dinner now. Busy? A secretary like you shouldn't have that much work. If you're late again, you're quitting your job. But that's not fair. I couldn't argue with him out of fear. Looking back, I wonder if I should have left him sooner. Despite my parents' concerns, I kept the truth hidden after getting married. I didn't want to disappoint them, so I dealt with everything silently. Then one day at work, my father called me into the reception room during a break. Since I often helped him as a secretary, going into the reception room wasn't unusual. When I entered, my father was already there. "What's up?" I asked. My father looked pleased and said, "It's been a year since you married David, right? Time to tell him the truth, like you promised." "Oh yeah, we agreed on that. Is something wrong? You seem uneasy." "Well, yes, but it's just, right now things are a bit..." Seeing my worried face, my father smiled and patted my shoulder. "Had a spat with David? It happens, especially for newlyweds like you. Your mom and I had our share of arguments too. But look at us now, still happy together. You'll be fine, Michelle. It's not exactly a fight. Don't worry, everything will be okay. Couples argue, right?" "You're right. Anything else bothering you?" "No, I'm okay. Nothing else. But I think I'll wait for things to calm down a bit before bringing it up," I said. "Don't let it bother you too much. Every couple has their disagreements." My father reassured me, thinking it was just a small argument. I hadn't confided in my parents about David's behavior to spare them worry, so my father assumed everything was fine. "You should make amends with David soon," he advised before leaving the room. Alone, I wrestled with emotions I couldn't articulate. Despite my parents' reservations, I had married David. I couldn't bear to tell my father about our worsening relationship. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I'd have to address it eventually to avoid suspicion. To keep my father from worrying, I had to maintain my marriage somehow. If possible, I wanted to improve our relationship. That night, I made sure to be home on time, ready to talk to David when he returned. As I finished preparing dinner, he walked through the door. I brought up the topic right away. "David, we need to talk," I said. "I'm tired," he complained. "This is important," I insisted. "As a married couple, I want us to share our lives equally and be happy together." "Equal? You and me? That's ridiculous," he scoffed, grabbing my hair harshly. "Ouch." I cried out, but he didn't let go. "Listen to me. I did you a favor by marrying you. You should be grateful I chose you," he said, sneering at my pain. "But you said you loved me," I protested. "Don't be foolish. I only pretended to like you because you're obedient and good at housework," he spat. "Just stay quiet and obey me," he ordered, pulling my hair closer to his face. From that moment on, I realized there was no hope for equality in our relationship. I couldn't bear to worry my parents, and divorce wasn't an option. My appetite faded away with each passing day, and I found myself merely coexisting with my roommate, who happened to be my husband. Then one morning, amidst this routine, I woke up feeling utterly drained. My head throbbed, and a chill ran through my body. Checking my temperature, I found it to be a high 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Summoning all my strength, I sat up and called out to my husband. "David, I'm sorry. I don't think I can manage breakfast today." "What? Why not?" I pleaded. "I have a fever of 104. I'm in agony. Can I just stay in bed?" In response, my husband let out a frustrated sigh and snapped. "Neglecting your duties because of a fever? Get to work, you lazy thing." But please understand, I'm really unwell. Enough excuses. You're just a maid. Don't you dare disobey me. Please, just for today, I'm begging you." With a loud click of his tongue, he stormed out of the room, leaving me trembling uncontrollably. I finally realized I was being pushed to my limit. If I keep going like this, I'll truly break down. This way of life will drive me insane, both mentally and physically. I know I need to take action, but I'm too exhausted to think clearly with this fever clouding my mind. Maybe it's the stress catching up to me, but I drift back to sleep. Hours later, I'm jolted awake by my husband's furious voice. "Didn't I tell you to wake up, you idiot?" Confused, I see it's already dark outside. While my fever has dropped, I still feel weak with a lingering headache. Despite my condition, he continues his tirade. "I called you several times. What were you doing sleeping? Called? I sent you a text that I'm bringing my boss home. Weren't you supposed to prepare drinks and snacks?" My husband demanded. "Wait a minute. You knew I was sick today, right? And yet you brought your boss home?" I invited him to continue drinking at home. "My promotion depends on this. Get up and get things ready now." "No, I can't. I'm still in my pajamas and I'm not feeling well at all. Stop making excuses. Just get out here now." He yanked me by the arm and forced me to stand in the kitchen, then hurried back to his boss. "Sorry to keep you waiting. Please come on in." I could hear my husband speaking cheerily from the entrance. "Are you sure this is okay this late? I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate." "That's what I've been saying. I don't have a wife, just a housemaid." "I'm a housemaid. Kind of like a main wife, you could say. But please don't mind." With that, my husband ushered his boss into the living room. I stood in my pajamas, feeling embarrassed and makeup-free. "Nice to meet you. My husband talks about you often." "I apologize for my appearance," I said, bowing my head. I'm Mr. Smith, the section chief. I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced." "Please don't worry about me. I'll prepare something right away," you replied. As I hurried back to the kitchen, hiding my face, my husband started scolding me. "Hurry up and make something. You're utterly useless," he berated. I'm sorry. Just give me a moment," I pleaded. "Stop talking and start working," he snapped. How much more embarrassing do you need to be, even with the section chief here? I'm sorry. I apologize, Mr. Smith. Our maid is quite incompetent," my husband explained. The section chief remained silent, his expression tense. Despite my efforts to prepare drinks and snacks, my husband continued to make cutting remarks like, "You're really useless." While my husband was in the bathroom, Section Chief Smith initiated a conversation. "Excuse me." I couldn't ignore him, so despite feeling flustered, I responded, "Yes, is there something you need?" "You're CEO Allen's daughter, aren't you?" My last name used to be Allen," I confirmed, realizing he meant my father, CEO Allen. "How did you know?" "I visited your father's company for business before. You served me tea once, right?" "Wait, you were from that time?" I typically attended meetings with our business partners, serving tea and being introduced as Mr. Allen's daughter. Smith was one of those people. Although David's workplace had become a client of my father's company, I hadn't told my father that David works there. Glancing towards the bathroom, Smith continued in a hushed tone. "What's going on with your husband's behavior? Is he always like this at home?" Yes, I admitted. "I can't believe what you've been enduring. Why haven't you told Mr. Allen?" "Well, regardless, this can't continue." "Leave it to me," Smith said, looking me straight in the eyes as he quickly packed up and left. In that moment, I felt a weight being lifted off my shoulders. It was like finding an ally in a moment of despair. When David returned from the bathroom, he was shocked to find that Smith had left. "Why didn't you stop him?" He yelled at me, but I chose to trust Smith's words and endure it. Several days later, I was called to my father's company and found both Smith and a visibly shaken David waiting. "What's going on? Why are you both here?" I asked, confused by the situation. In the tense atmosphere, my father addressed me with a serious expression. "I heard from Smith. You've been mistreated by David, haven't you?" Well, I struggled to respond. Understanding my intentions to spare him worry, my father expressed his gratitude. "Thank you, Smith, for bringing this to my attention and helping my daughter," my father said, and Smith bowed in acknowledgement. Then my father turned his stern gaze towards David. "David, I can't believe you've behaved this way. I regret allowing you to marry my daughter." "Please wait," David pleaded, visibly shaken. "I had no idea you were our business partner's president." "I didn't know Michelle was a CEO's daughter," David interjected. "Enough. So if you did know, you would have treated Michelle better." "You're truly despicable," my father rebuked. "No, there's no excuse for my behavior," David responded. "Excuses? I'm going to report you to your company's CEO. We have a long-standing relationship," my father declared. "No, please." David's eyes welled up with tears as he sank to his knees. Then he turned to me, pleading, "Michelle, please talk to your father for me. You want me to speak up?" I raised my voice, releasing my pent-up frustrations. "Do you have any idea how much I've suffered because of your controlling, chauvinistic behavior? I've endured it silently, trying to salvage our relationship. But you destroyed everything, treating me like a servant and constantly belittling me. Do you know how degrading that was? Michelle, please forgive me," David begged. "Enough. Don't you dare address me by my name so casually. No amount of apologies will ever be enough. I don't care what happens to you. You reap what you sow. If you understand, stay out of my life forever," I concluded, resolute in my decision. At the climax of my outburst, David broke down in tears. Smith gently guided him out of the reception room, offering a respectful bow before leaving. Eventually, David and I decided to divorce. When my father informed David's company's president about the incident, he lost his job due to poor behavior at work. Without any severance pay, David moved back in with his parents, who were already aware of the situation. His father reprimanded him severely and forced him to leave their home. Now, David works long hours at a factory to make ends meet, while also fulfilling his alimony obligations to me. Meanwhile, I returned to my parents' home after the divorce and focused on rebuilding my life. I've since fully recovered and dedicated myself to my career. I've maintained a close friendship with Smith, meeting him regularly. Although I'm not considering remarriage at the moment, if I do decide to tie the knot again, I hope to find someone like him. When that time comes, my dream is to create a happy